we transformed a lot of our monolith code base to microservices as part of our digital transformation using LLM and Gen AI application, right? So that's something that would take like weeks or days, so multiple days, it brought down to like minutes.
Hello and welcome to the AI Master Group podcast, featuring the people who are building the future of AI in their work today. I'm your host, Jim Griffin. Today, I'm very happy to have as our guest Nachiket Mehta, who's the head of data and analytics engineering, global operations at Wayfair. In addition to being a board member at a number of organizations, Nachiket has his master's degree in computer science from Northeastern University, and he also is almost there with an MBA from Purdue. Nachiket, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really happy to have you here. I'm so lucky. So you have obviously a key role at one of the most notable online retail brands, very significant player in furniture and home goods market, and one that's achieved significant growth, by the way. Can you describe your journey from a master's in computer science to the head of global data and analytics engineering at Wayfair?
Sure, happy to. Yeah. So I came to the US 20 years ago to pursue my master's in computer science. And it was a great experience being a Husky. And then my first job, I got into more software and data driven focus. Earlier in my career, played a lot of like consulting type of opportunities, and I solved a lot of business problem using the technology, which actually helped me get into like this good state where I understood the business problems and I could solve that using the technology and especially data. When I realized that a lot of problems were more data driven problem, whether they are tagged as such or not. And that's where like slowly my journey started focusing just on the data and analytics side while still keeping the technology and software at the focus and solving the business problem. Uh, I have played various roles in different organizations over the last 20 years. I have built a customer data platform, the CDP, when CDP term was not as official back in 2013, 2014. I was also a co-investor in a company that built CDP and played various roles from sales, pre-sales to technology, building the platform, selling the platform, running the managed services, starting offshore operations where we are going through the cost balancing. So it was a great experience. And then I've also been a co-founder of a food tech company that connected foodies out there with the home-based chefs. And then more recently, 5.5 years ago, I joined Wayfair, where that they were going through a very fast growth, and they were really looking for somebody to solve their end-to-end supply chain data problems at that time. And then slowly, I kind of got my role expanded from end-to-end supply chain management to the operations side of things, the customer services, then more recently supporting enterprise teams for finance, talent, likewise. I've also helped some board teams as a board advisors. And like you said, I'm completing my MBA. I have a capstone project to go, and I'm very excited to use my technical skills and business skills at work.
Wow, that's great. So you were recently, in fact, the reason that I met you is you were recently featured on the main stage for the Chief Data and Analytics Conference in Boston, speaking about delivering value and accelerating growth. And I recall that a key dimension of that revolved around centralized versus separate data governance in the age of AI. Can you describe your ideas about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, with the help of many, like 2 decades of experience, I've mostly observed where the data governance is usually a centralized function in most organizations. And as the organizations are much bigger, they have a bigger COE or a governance kind of teams out there. But despite of investing so many resources, they typically challenge or face challenges where the data producers, the core data producers, the domain teams are not aware of who is using that data at the end of the day, because they are throwing that data over the fence and having this centralized team manage their usage. And likewise, on the consumer side, the business who is trying to make decisions, strategic decisions or tactical decisions using data, they don't know who actually owns that data. Like for them, it's really the first point of contact where they get data from. But there is this whole daisy chain of data where the actual data ownership originates from somewhere that nobody even knows, right? Everyone knows their like first entry point before and after. So that's where like this whole concept of data mesh started, which is really promoting the more decentralized data ownership and domain driven ownership, and then treating data as a product, right? Each time when data changes hand, it changes the shape, and each person should treat data as a product while exchanging the data. So that was really the key concept I was talking about in that talk on the stage. And the key part is multifold. That the data mesh is not just a technology challenge, it's really the socio-technical approach. There's a huge culture shift that needs to go through to adapt it. Technology is definitely a key piece, but it's not alone.
So you mentioned this term, data mesh, a couple times just now. Can you double click on that and describe what a data mesh is from an engineering standpoint and how it gets implemented in an organization like Wayfair?
Yeah, absolutely. So data mesh has this like four core pillars, core components, right? One is the domain-driven ownership, like I said, domain-driven design that has been in place on the software world for over a decade now, right? It's just that the data is kind of moving much closer to that space. So that's number one. The second number is just treating data as a product, right? What it means, right? So for what at Wayfair, like what we did was we got the first principles of data, first principles of product, can combine them and created this like whole kind of white paper to promote the data as a product philosophy and culture change. And there is a platform built around it, which is the third part, which is a self-service data platform, right? You need to have a common platform that all producers and consumers are using consistently and exchanging data hence. And then fourth is federated governance, which is just spreading from that centralized governance to the decentralized governance. And the key portion part of this is really the platform from engineering perspective and this data contract management, right? We talk data contracts in like microservices reference, but what it really means is it a systematic data contracts that can be enforced, which is a key driver to implementing data mesh from engineering point of view.
So, domain, product, platform, federated governance. So, our focus until now has been on the technical and engineering side of data governance. But I imagine that there's probably a cultural dimension to that as well, maybe even a paradigm shift for many people or companies. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's probably like it's 80-20. I think 80% of that is really the cultural change, right? Like, so the data contract, like if you take an example, everyone talks about contract, but where that contract is located, right? Like there's an engineering aspect where the contract is a systematic contract and a YAML file that has like producer and consumer putting their agreements on the paper, like who is the owner of the data asset, uh, where do they escalate issues if something goes wrong with the data, what are the schema expectations, what are the quality expectations, configuring, codifying all of that, and then systematically enforcing that. That's an engineering aspect. Cultural aspect is how do you make it happen? How do you make so many people, who is almost all of your organization is dealing with data, to kind of get bought into this, right? So it's a leadership buy-in that you need. The leadership needs to be transformative and kind of like evangelizing this concept and that and associated to some business outcome is a big thing. And then also like more bottoms up, where you need to kind of create a win-win situation for the developers, right? Like, why do they need to establish data contract? Why do they need to adopt to this change? and how they can benefit, right? There are benefits, like when you articulate the benefits, where they would be able to know who their consumers are. There is a lineage component. They can trace who is using that data and how their ownership of data is exchanging hands, all the way downstream, whether you are using it for analytics purpose, BI, ML, AI, or even like technical purpose, right? So there's that aspect from producer point of view. And then cultural, like from consumer point of view, is that just knowing that trust, having the trust in data, that I know if I'm using this data to make critical business decisions, I trust the platform and I trust this lineage and the ownership, that yes, I have the gold standard data at my produce, right? So I think that's a huge cultural change. And there are some organizational factors, right? Like we have done certain like organizational alignments where you can't expect non-data people to kind of adopt to this concept if that's not their day job, right? So we have like I've created like embedded data engineering team that works close to certain domain owners and teach them what are the best practices around the data, and then establishing the initial part and then kind of changing the culture one at a time, starting with an MVP and then growing slowly, showing the value, showing the business, and then it kind of expands further.
There's one term that you've used a couple of times, and it's this word contract. And me, as more on the layman's side, when I hear contract or contract management, I'm thinking about external vendors and, making sure that I'm keeping track of, when they need to renew or what are the terms of that contract and so forth. But I think that you're using the term contract here in a different sense. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So contract in this sense is really, think about it as a YAML file. And by the way, this is an open source. There's an open source data contract template out there, right? PayPal implemented it, made it open source. It's part of Apache now. So there is an open source data contract template that can be leveraged.
You're listening to the AI Master Group podcast.
There is an open source data contract template that can be leveraged. It's one piece of the puzzle. You still need a whole system that we build in house to kind of articulate that. But so it's a YAML file, and we kind of got it before it made an open source, but it looks very similar, right? So like I was saying, it's a YAML file. A lot of, like, if you're using event streaming, your schema registry is tied to it. If you're using a BigQuery or a Redshift, like, or any like analytical data store, data warehouse, then you have your schema tied to Terraform or some infrastructure as a service tied to it. You have your data quality tools, and those rules are also part of it, right? So when producer and consumer come together and they say, I'm expecting this column or this data not to exceed this range of values, or I'm not expecting it to be null, right? Or you can go as complex as you want, right? You can configure your own rules, but that's codifying, putting it on the YAML, on the Git repo, and also integrating that as an enforcement factor as part of your CI/CD pipelines, right? So I'm going more technical now, but that's where like you are really enforcing, right? Like the contract could be on a Google Doc or a Word file, and everyone agreed at the initially, but then if it's not enforced systematically, nobody cares, right? Things are still broken. So that's where we really put it close to where the data exists, where the data producers and consumers can articulate, right? Consumers, obviously, they don't deal a lot with Git repo and CI/CD. So there is a UI component where they can go to the UI and they can look at like what are the gold standard data assets and what contracts exist and what contracts they can configure in a plain English, and they can understand what's happening, right? So that is both part, but that's what the contract means in this context.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So, the truth is, you've built something remarkable. And I know, on the other hand, that there are industry leading vendors with very well known names that offer solutions related to this. Things like data integration services and data catalog and data governance. So, what's your perspective about the solutions you've evaluated so far in those areas?
Yeah, we definitely evaluated, right? We evaluated the build versus buy options, and what we were really looking for wasn't available out there in the market, right? It's a combination of a data catalog, a governance with this data contract management, right? So we are Google Cloud partner, and first we reached out to Google Cloud that do you have something like this, and they had certain components that are within their toolkit which we leveraged, and there are certain things that wasn't available, so we could work with them to kind of influence their roadmap if possible. We also evaluated some open source options, and that's what we are leveraging, like things like Data Hub and few other things, the data contract template as an option. And then I also talked to some emerging startups, and then we became a design partner as they are building and focusing on this area. So also there was a learning happening in there, but they were moving as fast as we could because of our in-house resources and our like engineering talent that Wayfair has hired so much. So then my team decided to build it, like leverage what is available in the market and then build it like as a more comprehensive solution for the faster go-to market.
So, talking now, of course, there's different kinds of data. There's structured data and unstructured data. But if we talk about unstructured data, and naturally, there's a lot of conversation about generative AI. And in that particular domain, there's obviously a need to be able to trace back to where the data comes from. Also, in structured data, there's a need to be able to trace back to where the data comes from. And that's such an obvious need that a lot of work's already been done in that. And so there are pretty good tools out there for that right now. What approach have you used for this at Wayfair?
Yeah, no, I think, like I say, there are tools out there. Many vendors within in the data space and AI space are trying to identify where the gap exists and try to create solutions on it. Like a lot of funding is going in that space nowadays. So we have definitely leveraged the foundations, the good data foundations that we have built. Lineage is a very critical component, and then you can achieve lineage, like it's a metadata platform, but it really depends on what technologies are used underneath that, right? If you just look at the analytic space, there is finite set of technologies that a company may be using, or there could be a lot more that they have to integrate to really drive that lineage. uh, but and then you have to be careful with the data sensitivity issue, the privacy issues, who gets access to what data, the metadata, query logs, and stuff like that. And then like once you expand this into truly shift left approach, where you are going into your software engineering and application engineering side of the things, and how you integrate that lineage all the way back, not just start with the data lake, but go beyond that, and then identify the true domain ownership and data as a product mindset and the true federated governance going all the way to the left. That's where it becomes a little complex. Many companies have this out of the box connectors like plugins that you can enable certain technologies to it. But if you don't have certain technology or certain plugins, then that lineage breaks, and then that solution is a partially good solution. But on the context of Gen AI, what we have also done is we anchored all of our data practices around the good data management, data modeling, the ontology aspect of it. So there was a need where we built an in-house tool to connect the ontology, which is more industry standard ontology that consumers understand. And anytime a data producer is kind of trying to publish their data in a public interface outside of their domain, they have to abide by this like common ontology that we have established. So what that helps with is not only this good governance that is federated, right, for all their public data assets with the good data contracts that has to be abided by this ontology, but also it drives a lot of curation for your Gen AI from LLM monitoring, from prompt engineering perspective. Well, you are adding a lot of context, right? So a common thing, for example, is there is a box that is being shipped from point A to point B, there are like 9 different identifiers within the company. And like when we anchor that, this is what it is really called. And here are the different nouns you can call them. Now, a consumer from Gen AI perspective could ask a question. They don't need to know what it is called in the ontology. They can use whatever. They can use a box, they can use a carton, they can use a tracking number or whatever, right? And then the system would understand you are talking about this now, right? So they will leverage that good foundations and this ontology to give you the better, faster answer without hallucinating on the Gen AI output.
Excellent. Of course, this is all moving ahead very fast, right? We can see that there's a lot happening. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about, are there any new technologies or developments that you've got your eye on right now that for you look promising for the future?
Yeah, so one thing we are trying, right? Obviously, we have been doing AI for over a decade now, and there are AI being implemented, and especially Gen AI being implemented in various areas, right? Like for hyper personalization, assisting our agents, customer service agents as a co-pilot with human in the loop. Uh, there are like internal tech transformations that we did where we leveraged this ontology application, the domain model store, and we transformed a lot of our monolith code base to microservices as part of our digital transformation using LLM and Gen AI application, right? So that's something that would take like weeks or days, so multiple days, it brought down to like minutes, right? So that's a power that is really powerful where how we can achieve. But one thing that I'm also like from analytics perspective, we are driving is this whole cycle, right? Like when business executives or leaders are trying to make strategic decisions, uh, currently that whole life cycle is very lengthy, right? You need like, I have a question, how's my business doing? And just to answer, like, how's this KPI performing, or what should I do? Should I add more trucks if there is a congestion, if there's a hurricane in a certain area? Like, what should I do, right? And if I make certain decisions, how much is it gonna cost me? And if that cost me, is it worth making those decisions, right? So there are a lot of those decisions that they typically make and they would like to make, which involves a lot of meetings, a lot of people involved, a lot of reporting, a lot of analysis, lot of things and heavy work involved. So what we are trying to do is, if we can convert, if we can leverage the power of NLP and Gen AI, and then kind of shorten that lifeline overall, like the timeline rather, not lifeline, to cut that to as short as possible, right? So if we can ask a business question, we can leverage these good foundations that we have built, understand how we can convert that to a SQL, execute that SQL or whatever language, whatever the code, get the results, analyze the results, and answer that question back in English. That's pretty much a lot of analytics is around, right? So if we can leverage the power of this good data foundations and the federated governance and the ownership mentality, we can move much faster to drive faster business decisions. So that's one thing that really excites me, and we have seen we are being very conservative in our initial approach. We are not opening that up to everything because then it becomes the too much noise to handle. So we are very conservative in just like curating that to avoid hallucination and get as good result as possible. In our early phases, like we can have like human in the loop, right? So if the response is as per mark, you give response, it will learn. If it's not, give that feedback, and then we can keep improving. That's one area. I think the second is, I think in general, there's an industry. Software has gone a lot on the shift left and the microservices part. I think data, like with tools and companies like DBT, has kind of moved a lot of like data much closer to the software, and there are so many vendors out there who are doing that. I think there is an overall opportunity where software or the product management and the data product management shouldn't be considered two separate verticals, right? And then especially when you are generating AI based applications, right? They are still like considered different verticals. There should be a way that they are all in one, right? Nobody can differentiate like what it is. Ultimately, you are using all of that together and then making certain decisions or driving certain decisions for faster output.
Yes, obviously. And in fact, a lot of that data there's this pre-training and then so forth. But yes, that first use case that you defined, somebody just needs to make a decision. Should I put some trucks out there? What do they cost? I've seen that. People get into a full fire drill trying to figure out what the answer to that question is. So you can be a hero if you can find a short path to those answers. Oof. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, Nachiket. If any of our listeners want to get in touch with you or share ideas, what's the best way for them to do that?
Personally, via LinkedIn is the best way. They're interested in more at Wayfair. Like reach out to me, I can get connected. We have a Wayfair physical retail stores now that we are opening beyond our online presence. So visit a big IKEA store in Chicago neighborhood or in the states near you. We may have an outlet. But yeah, happy to help more on the technology or this transformational change. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Once again, thank you very much. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Jim.
You've been listening to the AI Master Group podcast. I'm your host, Jim Griffin. Until next time, stay curious and stay in front.